Imagine stepping out of your air-conditioned home into a brutal 104 degrees day. Your phone probably shows that warning, extreme heat alert. Now picture dealing with that heat without AC, without refrigeration, without even an electric fan. Oh, and you've got to build pyramids. Welcome to ancient Egypt, where summer wasn't just hot, it was like living in nature's own pizza oven. Hey history fans! Today we're diving into how ancient Egyptians not only survived, but thrived in temperatures that would make a modern thermometer cry. And trust me, their solutions were so clever, they'll make your summer cooling bill look like amateur hour. Let's put this in perspective. While we complain when our AC drops below 70 degrees Fahrenheit, ancient Egyptians dealt with temperatures that regularly hit 115 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade, if you could find any shade. Archaeological evidence shows their walls were literally hot enough to fry an egg on. In fact, one ancient papyrus actually mentions people doing exactly that. Talk about the world's first outdoor kitchen. But here's what really makes this intense. The sand temperature could reach a blistering 150 degrees Fahrenheit. Ancient Egyptian sandals actually had special thick soles made from papyrus and palm fiber because regular leather would literally cook in the heat. Talk about hot feet. Now forget everything you've seen in movies about ancient Egyptian houses. These weren't just buildings, they were the world's first natural cooling systems. Archaeological digs have shown that the average Egyptian home was like a medieval refrigerator in reverse. Thick mud brick walls up to 3 feet thick kept the heat out better than your modern insulation. High ceilings, some reaching 15 feet, let hot air rise above living spaces. Tiny windows near the top created natural wind tunnels. And get this, they built their roofs with palm fronds mixed with mud, creating nature's own cooling tiles. Recent studies of preserved homes in places like Deir el-Medina show these houses stayed around 20 degrees cooler than outside temperatures. That's better performance than some modern AC units. But the real genius was in the neighborhood planning. Egyptian architects didn't just build houses, they created entire communities designed to beat the heat. Streets were laid out to funnel cooler air through the city. Buildings were positioned to cast shadows on each other. Shared courtyards created cool microclimates. Underground storage rooms stayed naturally cool year-round. Archaeologists recently discovered that some neighborhoods in ancient Thebes had dedicated cooling zones, public areas with pools and shade trees where people could escape the worst of the afternoon heat. Ancient Egyptian community centers, if you will. You'd think in all this heat, ancient Egyptians would wear as little as possible, right? Wrong. They were actually the original inventors of smart clothing. Their white linen outfits weren't just a fashion statement, they were engineering genius. Archaeological fabric samples show they developed a special weaving technique that created tiny air pockets in the cloth. Modern tests on recreated Egyptian linen show it's more effective at cooling than some modern moisture-wicking athletic wear. Take that, expensive gym clothes. But here's where it gets really interesting. Egyptian textile makers were basically ancient material scientists. They developed special washing techniques that made linen more breathable. Pleating patterns weren't just decorative, they increased airflow. Some garments were treated with perfumed oils that provided evaporative cooling. Elite Egyptians had special summer wigs made with ventilation channels. The Egyptians didn't just adapt their homes and clothes, they completely restructured their day around the sun. And they were way ahead of their time. Dawn, major work hours, basically ancient rush hour. Midday, everyone headed inside for the main meal and rest. Late afternoon, back to work when temperatures dropped. Evening, social time, and family activities. One ancient text describes how workers building the pyramids would start their day by dipping their clothes in the Nile. As the water evaporated, it created a natural cooling system. Ancient Egyptian air conditioning. Who knew? Speaking of workers, the Egyptians had some pretty innovative ways of keeping their labor force from overheating. Work sites had dedicated water carriers. Rest stations were built with thick reed roofs. Workers rotated between sun and shade tasks. Special supervisors called water chiefs managed hydration. Recent studies of worker villages show they even had designated cooling rooms where laborers could recover during the hottest parts of the day. Speaking of water, the Nile wasn't just their source of life, it was their entire cooling infrastructure. But here's where it gets really interesting. They created porous clay pots called zir that kept water cool through evaporation. Archaeological evidence shows they would hang wet reed mats in windows. Some homes had channels built into walls where water would flow, cooling the entire structure. They even built fountains that created fine mists in courtyards. Modern scientists tested a recreated zir pot and found it could keep water at 50 degrees Fahrenheit even when outside temperatures hit 110 degrees Fahrenheit. That's better than your friend's fancy smart fridge. But the real masters of cooling were Egyptian gardeners. They created miniature oases that could drop local temperatures by up to 10 degrees. Grape arbors provided living shade. Pools reflected heat away from buildings. Strategic tree placement created cool air corridors. Plants were selected for maximum evaporative cooling. Here's a mind-blower. Wealthy Egyptians would have servants fan water over beds of charcoal, creating the world's first evaporative cooling system. Some rich folks even slept on raised platforms with water basins underneath. Ancient Egyptian waterbeds. From their brilliant architecture to their clever daily routines, ancient Egyptians didn't just survive the heat. They wrote the original survival guide for desert living. And get this, modern sustainable architects are actually starting to copy their techniques. Looks like what's old is literally becoming cool again. If you enjoyed discovering these ancient Egyptian life hacks, hit that subscribe button for more hidden secrets of the ancient world. Drop a comment below telling me which cooling technique surprised you the most. Was it the natural AC systems, the water-cooled beds, or maybe those surprisingly high-tech clothes? Remember, next time you're complaining about the heat, at least you're not building pyramids in it.